Shenetta, Michelle Green, and Ardry Henderson, welcome back to Real Talk. Thank you guys for being here again to continue this important conversation around race, racism, and healing and transforming that and how we can move that forward within ourselves and share a conversation with others who are also looking at this. And so we had a really good conversation last time, and before we knew it, we were like an hour and a half in and didn't feel like we even, got to everything that we wanted to talk about. And so we wanted to come back together. I know that you guys had some questions for me that I want to, definitely give you the opportunity to ask. So if we want to start there, we can.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, the question that I have is, just as a Caucasian woman, what's the first memory that you have of being introduced to racism? Not so much your own personal experience as far as you being a target of racism, but the belief system that maybe some others, family or friends, may had. What's your first memory of being introduced to that?
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about kind of the situations, good and, quote, good and bad, that kind of got me to where I am today. And one of the biggest things I think that I can remember happening is, I think I may have been in early high school. I'm not sure when it was, but I remember it was interracial dating. And that was a big deal. There was somebody, she was a few years younger than me, and she started, going with a kid who was Black. And I could remember just there being, it almost felt like an uproar. It was a huge deal. And it was what was being talked about. And it was like, in a way that made me feel like, yeah, this is definitely not okay. And that was the belief that I took from that. And then it kind of just, I think, went away. And then in high school, one of my good friends started dating a guy who was Black, and it was real secretive. And I remember when I found out, kind of all of that started happening, and then other people started finding out. And again, it was this really big deal, and that situation with her, and actually she and I have never talked about it, and this has made me want to have a conversation with her, like, about it from a much older perspective. But I can remember I said some things to her that were hurtful, and I know they were, and I know when I said them to her, I knew it didn't feel right in my gut, but it was coming from, I had to look at what it was coming from, actually, and I didn't do this until a little bit later. And it was coming from the fact that I was hurt, that she didn't tell me. It was about me, She didn't tell me, that I had to find it out from other people. And then I had to ask myself the question, like, why didn't she tell me? Did I do something that made it not feel safe for her to tell me? And so I can remember that being a really big deal. Those types of situations are the things that I can really remember. And I was thinking about this too, like, where did I hear the majority of people using the N-word? It tended to be, and I can relate it back to some of these situations, is the older white men, and then what trickled down from that. I would have to say that was probably what really brought it to the radar, that this was wrong, or there was something wrong with it, was around interracial dating.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other question that I had, and you did remind me of that, and it's so ingrained in my thought process that I didn't even think to ask you that, because again, it went back to one of those assumptions that I had, that it's just the way that it is. it goes back to corporate America when conducting business with someone of color or African American. Again, for me, it feels, and I should be used to it and read to, okay, it exists. But at the end of the day, it still is one of those assumptions, because there's never been anything that has been said to me individually, but I experienced it kind of early in my career concerning attitudes. Like, even when I first began working with Department of Juvenile Justice back in the 90s, often I would be selected to go to certain meetings of, that normally your director would be at, or the head of your department. And I think because of my professionalism, so they would always select one, counselor or whatever. And oftentimes I may be one of few in the entire room. And so the attitude came off like, let me feel her out a little bit to see, where she's coming from, or why is she here. And so as you begin to commune or conversate or respond to some of the questions that were being asked or the topics, then if you came off as, one that's intelligent and who can articulate their thoughts and feelings well, then it was almost like you were accepted a little bit better versus someone who may just be as intelligent, but their delivery may be a little bit different, and the attitude would be kind of different towards that person. So it always left me feeling, okay, when I walk into a room, what's the immediate assumption before I open my mouth? And it goes kind of back to what Ardry was talking about last week, where that 110%, often that's how you enter a room or business meeting, always remembering what we've been taught. You don't just give 100%, you give 110%, because the expectation is much higher for us when it comes to that. So I think my question is that really an attitude that the majority of Caucasians have, Yeah. And when I don't experience the attitude, it almost catches me off guard. So I'm glad we're talking about it. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. But it is one of those things. It's kind of hard to articulate, and I hope I'm doing a good job with that. But that's my other question.
Yeah. Yes. And when you said it last week, and then, when I listened to the replay of our conversation from last week, I heard it again. And I really started thinking about that. Like, are there any preconceived, prejudice or judgments? And I can honestly say and I'm only can speak for myself, and I I want to have other people, other white people, other different races, us coming together and having more of these conversations, because right now it's three of our experience. And so that doesn't represent, a lot, but it's a great place, I feel like, for us to start. And so I've thought back to meetings with work, and even like school projects and things when I was in college or in school. And that's never been something that I can say has ever been anything that to me has made a difference, or I felt like there's some assumption. Or now, when you just said, and I'm just being really honest here, when you just said about the delivery, and how it comes across, I can probably think back to times where I've thought something around that. Yeah, just delivery makes a difference. But I can honestly say that that's true, doesn't matter what color you are. I tried to think about this. And I also in this, I've thought back to what were my, I thought about the question about what were the situations that happened in my life that caused me to like those ingrained beliefs of our society and our community. And then I also stopped and really started thinking about who were the people that have come into my life that have forced me to question that. And, I can think back to being in kindergarten, and I don't know if anybody remembers Miss Griggs, but she wasn't my kindergarten teacher, but I had a white kindergarten teacher, and I can remember having an issue in kindergarten, and I told my teacher, and it was like there was nothing done about it. And I can remember telling Miss Griggs, and I can remember for the first time feeling like she actually hears me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that she has always stuck out in my mind, and then also during that time when all of the questions around, the interracial dating, a couple of my very best friends in high school were Black. And so, it was like when the beliefs started to kick in, which they would, and they did, don't get me wrong. It was always like there was this other side that was, or these people in my life that I really cared about that were causing me to question, like, how true is this? Like, it doesn't feel right. You know what I'm saying? And so at an early age, that's why I started questioning, like, a lot of different things in my life, not just around this, but this was just one area that came up when I started questioning a lot of things, and maybe also, again, it's based on experience. From the time I was in high school, I've known, and he's no longer with us, but Dr. Osborne, who was Jamaican, dark skin, and he was always an example of one of the hardest working people that that still to this day that I've known in my life, and that he cared about people. He was a surgeon, a hand surgeon, and he cared about his patients, and it didn't matter who they were. He wanted the best outcome, and he sacrificed a lot of his personal life to take care of others. And so, I can say that I've had examples of really caring and close relationships in my life that when those judgments or those, things started coming up, I can't just ignore them. I can't just ignore the people in my life to believe this judgment. And so it was always this, when those things would happen, it was like, and I can see, and it's kind of what Ardry said last time, where I am now, is this where I've always been? Heck no, but through years and experiences, it's been a reconciliation of what are my beliefs versus what do I know is true.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I could say that I don't think that from that standpoint of this conversation that's ever been something for me that has come up. I know I said a lot, and hopefully I answered the question. It's easy to start rambling when we start talking. So if that answered your question or led to more questions, go ahead.
Yes, it did. It did. Thank you for sharing.
And do you have any other questions, or Ardry, you have some questions?
Yeah, when we were talking the other day after we talked for so long, and then we got off, and then we talked for probably another 20, 30 minutes. And one of the questions I told you that I had was, I guess I wanted to know how it felt from a white person's point of view when you're faced with racism, from the opposite side, from the Black side, or if you have ever, run up on that or had that encounter or whatever, how it feels. Because I know I mentioned that sometimes it's hard to separate yourself from the encounters you have of racism, and then when you're dealing with a genuinely good-hearted person that just loves people, all people, it doesn't matter what color you are or whatever. And sometimes you when you run into the situation, if you dealt with racism and then you run into somebody else that's a good-hearted person, and then you're just kind of apprehensive about dealing with that person because you're already on guard. And so I want to know how you guys perceive it, or how you feel, or if you've ran into that situation.
Yeah, I have like 5 different things coming to my mind right now. So let me figure out the best way to, yes, I mean, I'm gonna speak to several different things. So one thing is, Yes, and have I hurt people? Probably. I mean, and I was trying to think of specific examples where maybe I've said something, and the one that stood out to me and that I can remember the most, and that I can remember where we were when I said it, was with that friend that I mentioned before. And so that was with, a white person, not a black person. But I can remember situations too where people would accuse, whether I can remember one time where I felt like that's where it was coming from, directed at me, that it was about race, with this particular situation. And for me, that was kind of like, whoa, that was not at all what it was about, And so that put me on the defensive of like, no, it had nothing to do with that. Like, that's where you're coming from. And I know that that can tend to be something, and maybe we'll come back and talk about this a little bit, that I've heard other white people say, is that, it tends to a lot anytime there's anything. And what I've learned from this conversation and what we're doing is we speak in a lot of generalizations, which I think can make things even worse. Because what I was about to say was that, sometimes it's like, black people will, use the race card when it's not even about race. And so then that puts people on the defensive, or thinking like, getting frustrated and that type of thing. Now, there have been times that I can think back where things were said, and things were said in front of me that I knew didn't sit right, and I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut because, one, at that time, I kept my mouth shut about a lot of things, that I felt convicted about, because I was afraid, and I was trying to fit into, I was more worried. I've spent a lot of my life worrying more about what others think than standing in my own truth. And that's something that yeah. And so that's something that I've worked on a lot, and I still struggle with it. But one thing that I can remember is, I can remember particularly this day, and I was standing there with two women, and one was younger, and she had a I believe she had a baby, a biracial baby at the time, and but if not, she definitely was dating a guy who was black. I'm pretty sure she had a baby. I know she did at this time, because that's where I was like, and then there was another woman standing there, and we were doing something, trying to fix something or figure out something. And the woman who didn't have the baby said something like, well, we may have to nigger rig.
I knew you were going to say that.
And, yeah.
Wait, I missed the word. What was it?
To nigger rig it.
Oh, okay.
And again, it was we were all white, but I just was like, did that happen? And then I immediately looked to the woman with the baby who, is in a relationship with a black man, and I'm like, okay, she gonna say something? Like, what? I mean, and here's the truth of it, is that the woman who said it did not say it with any malice. You could tell it was one of those things that was just ingrained, autopilot, a term that did, whatever. And so I just sat there for a second, like, because it truthfully seemed like I was the only one that was uncomfortable in the situation.
I have to interrupt for just 1 second. Jennifer, I'm laughing only because that's one of those words I didn't think y'all even knew existed.
What do you
mean? What I mean by that is something that's said within the African American community. And I just, honestly, I'm being real, I didn't know that you all even knew that word existed. So.
Yeah, and I've heard that phrase many times in my life.
Gotcha.
Not recently. And we'll get to that. But yeah, I've heard it quite a bit. So I wasn't surprised so much about the saying, and honestly, I was that she said it in front of the woman that she said it in front of, and that speaks volumes also, right? And so I was like, dude, am I the only one that just heard this? Right? And I'm like, come on. And I was like, kind of encouraging, like, are you going to say, like, that's not really okay to say? I mean, and this was probably now 15 years ago, or 14 years ago. And so we just carried on. And I mean, and that ate at me. And I can remember, I think I had the conversation with my mom saying, I've got to say something, because I was friends with the woman I was friends with both of them, but the woman who said it, again, it wasn't from a malicious place. It just rolled off her tongue. But I can remember saying to my mom, like, I've got to say something to her. I can't not. Like, this was one of the times where I actually was having the courage to say it. And I can remember I did have the conversation with her, and it was one of those hard, uncomfortable conversations. And it was kind of like, I don't know if you even noticed what you said, but you said it in front of this other person who, we're all friends with and whatever. And she was surprised. I mean, like, it didn't even register to her. And there have been many other, and many, again, with generalizations. I mean, there's been probably a handful or two of other times where there were similar things and I didn't say anything. Now I'm at a point in my life where if somebody starts to say something, which truthfully, and we'll come back to this too, talking about how things have changed, that where somebody will say something, I'll be like, no, don't say that. Why are you saying that? Like, you're making, again, a lot about generalizations,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there's been times where I've heard things and, said things. And then there have been times where I've heard things and I have been too afraid to say things. And that's, a constant work in progress for me. It's to stand up in my truth.
Do you think that happens with a lot of white people? I think sometimes, I know sometimes it happens in the Black community where you probably want to say something, but you don't because you feel like I mentioned before, you'll be labeled as a sellout. So do you think that happens a lot with white people? If you want to defend that person, if you guys are in a group and someone says something like you said you would speak up. I think a lot of times it probably just gets overshadowed, or people just don't speak up because they're afraid of, not being a part of the in crowd anymore, or people thinking, what a lot of white people sometimes get called when they do hang with Black people is the famous nigger lover or whatever. So do you think that happens a lot?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm, making my own, guess about it, yes. And basing it on my own experience, I would say yes.
I know you can't answer for everybody. So, I mean, I don't want to do what we just talked about, the generalization of, everybody in a bunch, because, so just.
Yes, but yes, based on my own experience and, people that I know in different situations, yeah, I can say, I think it happens around race. I think it happens around so many things. And race just happens to be one of them. And I think depending on who you're around, it may make it easier or harder to want to stand up. And I think that's why sometimes a lot of people don't say anything.
Yeah.
I think that happens. I think that happens a lot. Yes, if I had to guess.
Okay. And one of the other questions I had after we went off camera was, well, I'll just say this. I saw this on Facebook this week, and it was one of the questions that I had. I saw a Black lady talking about her and a friend, which the friend happened to be a white lady. I'm not sure where they were at, I think they went maybe like some store or something. And the white lady couldn't get out. The Black lady had to tell the white lady to stay in the car because she didn't know if her Black friends would accept her. And she made mention of how defeated the white lady looked. And she mentioned that afterwards, after she went home, she still felt, some type of way. She felt, really bad for her friend. And I guess the conversation between her and her friend was she wanted her friend to know that what happened to her on that one instance is something that happens to her almost every other day. And so they were able to have that conversation and relate and both, feel the same pain for the same reason, racism. And it just, I don't want to say it opened my eyes to it because you and I had already been discussing that. It just kind of, confirmed some of the things that you and I had already, been discussing about, if people would just consider the fact that it happens to both sides. And when it happens to the other side, you can see that, okay, well, this is real. This does happen. Because I know sometimes people will perceive people of color as whining or complaining, or why don't you just shut up about it, or you're still talking about it and it happened so long ago. But it's the reality of it is it's still happening. It may not be happening to the extent of the way it used to happen, but it's still happening.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that the conversation that she and her friend had was really good. It was a good conversation. I thought it was a step forward. And I even reached out to her on Facebook, to let her know that, I thought that was a good thing. It was a good thing. And I was so glad that her and her friend, I didn't want the lady to have to, go through that. I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that, but it's reality. But I was so glad that, they had something that, they could come together on and see that, it's real. And then steps could be made to move forward from there.
Yeah. 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 And, just to what you said, I can think of situations in my life where, maybe I was the only white person. And I'm thinking particularly of a time when it was, when everyone else was Black. And I did feel a little bit like what I'm sensing is that I'm feeling a little bit like, Shenetta, what you said. I mean, in a little bit different realm, not in the business sense, but just that there is something when you're the only whatever in the group. But again, I think that was some of my own stuff because it wasn't anything that was outwardly projected from anybody. And it sounds like the experience you're speaking of was a little bit different. Like maybe she was asked to stay in the car because it would be perceived a little bit different. I dated someone who was Hispanic, and I was with the whole family, literally like 20, 25 people, and I'm the only white person, and I'm like, and I could make a joke about it and we would laugh about it and stuff. And, but it was never anything where I felt like, uncomfortable or whatever, but it's something you think about. It's definitely something you think about. And I can remember now that I'm like, because I haven't thought about it from this perspective, being younger, I'm particularly thinking of like high school, early college, and being in like the only white person around a group of Black people and having the thought, if other white people see me, what are they going to think about me? I can definitely remember, feeling that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is very real, and I think it still happens. And like we've kind of all said, I think that the biggest thing is with all of this for me is that underneath we all feel the same. Shenetta, like you were saying too. Yeah, I hope that spoke to that a little bit, Ardry, as to what you were speaking of.
It absolutely did. I think the peer pressure that we sometimes experience in school just never goes away. I mean, it kind of grows with us because like you said, you're just afraid to kind of stand out or stand up because you're afraid you'll be, ostracized or whatever. And some of us, we're so afraid we won't even take the chance. We won't even chance it. I just rather if I can just pretend like it didn't happen and just get through it, it'll be okay. And I think sometimes that's what a lot of us do.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah. And I think it's scary sometimes to even own these things, because what type of person does that make me? You know what I mean? What type of person does that make me? It's funny how it, it seems like it's real easy to say we all fall short. We can all say we fall short and we're not perfect, but I know it's also a lot harder to take the next step, which is to really look at where we fall short and why and where we have. And I think that's where so many of the answers and so many opportunities for God to show us opportunities for growth and deeper love. But, it was funny when I was sharing the story about the two women and the lady using the phrase nigger rig, and you saying that was a something that you guys use, and you didn't realize that other people said it. And that's surprising to me because I've heard it a lot. I've said it before. And so it's interesting to see how we don't even realize, it's like we don't even realize certain things about each other. And so, yeah, I'm just appreciating the opportunity that we get to see these things, and we get to see that, and there's probably some things that I think that you guys don't say. I can't think of one right now, but it's probably, you probably say it or have thought about it or experienced it or whatever too. And so a question that I'm going to ask, and we're just going to be real, since especially that came up, using the N-word, that's something that I can say, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too, about because I think it's important to look at where we have come, because if we only focus on where we have to go and don't give ourselves credit for where we've come from, then we do ourselves a disservice. It feels like nothing has ever changed, and it adds more to that frustration. And so I can't remember the last time that I heard a white person use the N-word in in slang, yes. In a derogatory, malicious manner, I've really been trying to think the last few days, and I cannot remember. I'm not saying it's not used, because I know that it is. I know 100% that it is used with white people still. But I guess maybe just the people that I'm around. I'm not sure. But do you guys? Two questions. Do you guys feel like that you hear that as much from white people as you used to? And two, the question that I'm going to ask, and that I know a lot of other people ask, is why do, and usually I think it's black guys, use that term so much when it's so offensive when white people use it?
For me, honestly, I don't know. And I work at a juvenile facility, and so I try to always, well, I do. Whenever I hear the kids use the term with each other, I always correct them and say, no. You're not going to say it to each other and then get mad when somebody else says it to you. If it's meant to be a derogatory word, it's derogatory anyways, whether it's said from us to ourselves or whether somebody else says it. It's almost crazy like how we get to pick and choose when it's derogatory. It's the same word, but we get to pick and choose when it's derogatory. And I probably know I won't get any cool points for saying this, but I've got to the point now where I'm trying, and I'm intentionally trying to train myself to whether the word is said to me from a white person or a black person. I'm trying to train myself to not be offended by it anymore, because I'm finding sometimes I think we give people power. And that's any race, any gender, whatever. You give people the power to hurt you. So if you let something be offensive to you, whether it's meant to be offensive or whether it's meant to be derogatory, you give people the power to, and I'm just not letting people control my life or my day per se anymore. So I'm trying to get to the point where I can kind of laugh at stuff and keep it moving. Like for instance, yesterday, I had an experience at Publix, and it was so funny because it probably took me a couple of minutes or so to realize that the guy was talking to me and that it was meant to be offensive. But, and I won't go into the whole detail about it, but I would just say, the guy had on a particular, the mask. Everybody's wearing masks now. So he had on a particular mask or whatever, and this mask had something on it. And I'm honestly, anybody that knows me, I'm rambling a little bit, but anybody that knows me knows that I love seafood. Like, so I'm headed to Publix yesterday to get my seafood. I'm not clueless to what's going on around me, and look over at the guy, turn my head back immediately, and then I hear him say something to his wife, and then I get in the store and I thought, I was like, that was for me? It took me a minute for it to register in my brain, because my intent was, I'm going in the store, I'm going to get my seafood, I'm not thinking about, anything or whatever. So it took me a while, for it to click to my brain, okay, he was being, derogatory, he was saying something, and it was so funny. So again, I could have easily ran back outside and screamed at him and act like an idiot or whatever, but you choose to decide what you let offend you. And I know I kind of got off topic a little bit, but I do try to correct, the kids where I work, and anybody around me, even, if I hear, my nephews or my nieces or, say it, I'm like, listen, don't do that. Don't do that, And I'm going to tell you another popular one that's popular with Black people. And I probably won't get any cool points for this one either. But this one is popular. Whenever you have a Black person that speaks correct grammar, they're often, picked on or ostracized. And the term is, you talk like white people. Mm. I hear that. That's corrected immediately. Mm-hmm. Everyone can use correct grammar. And that's what if I hear someone say that, I say, no. Everyone can use correct grammar. That was one of the things I was telling you last week. There's conversations that need to be had, even in the Black community, because we are prejudiced against our own race. Yeah. Well, no points for that either, but it's the truth. So, I can't explain why, or I don't know why we use that word sometimes, because I'm not going to lie. I will not lie. That's what I won't do. Mm-hmm. I have used that word referring to someone else of the same, race, color. When you're home, when you're in the privacy of your own place, your own friends, whatever, your conversations are way different than what they are when you're around just people of different races. And that's both for the same size. So, absolutely. Yeah, I can't explain why we do. And then we try to decide when it's going to be derogatory if it's said by a white person. And what's crazy, it can even be said by a white person that Black people feel comfortable with. And sometimes they'll let it slide. And that, like you said, when the lady said that to you guys, were in a conversation and she said that, and you kind of look crazy. Sometimes I'll do that. If I'm around a group of younger crowd than me, and there's a white person and, there's Black people, and then the white person, says nigger a lot. I'm kind of looking like, is nobody? And so I just kind of, nobody said, I just go with the flow or whatever. So I don't know, maybe Shenetta has a different answer, but I don't know why. I don't know. And I almost want to try to talk to some older people and maybe go back and see, like, when that word became okay for us to use against each other, and be comfortable with it, because I know it was intended for a hurtful thing. So I don't know at what point it became, just the normal for us to address each other like that. I don't know. That's a good question.
Shenetta, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, yes, I have a lot to add to it. That's still one of those things, I don't care who says it, Black, white, whomever, it still gets up underneath my skin. And I have learned over the years not to always address it when in a certain audience. I try to now address it with individual people, or like Ardry was saying earlier, with the students that we work with. For me, it still hits home only because I know how the word originated. I know how and when it became one that was used to become something so negative, even throughout, the generation before us, how even with them, it went from being called a nigger to being called Negro, then it went to being called a person of color, then it went to being called Black, and then Afro-American and African-American. So it's a whole, in my opinion, a whole train of thought by it. And it goes back, in my opinion, even back, we were talking about slavery last time, but it goes back pre-time when Europeans began to go to the African continent. Oftentimes they would visit the area of Niger, and that combined of several different countries that exist in Africa. And so originally, when we were referred to, it was Niger, or if you speak Spanish, because the word Black in Spanish is Negro. And so as slavery began, of course, the dialect was different, and it turned into Niger to nigger.
Okay.
It became something negative. And it was something that, the slave master called us, or Caucasians called people of color, or mulattoes even, and just people of color in general. And then it became something was acceptable where we even called ourselves that. And so it's one of those things I always think about, what's meant behind the word, because even we were taught that the word nigger means someone who is ignorant, someone that's less than, and even Webster's dictionary, I think they've changed it throughout maybe the last 30 years. But back even when we were very little, it was something still pertaining to a person of color, that was in there. I remember being taught that. So I always think about, when even we say it, what's your purpose for saying that? And even if it's the slang word, not what the kids say normally, if they're talking amongst themselves, it goes from Nigger to Nigga, and that's a conversation I've often had with students. Well, Ms. Green, that just means that's my dog, or that's my boy. So my question is, then, well, why can't you just say that's my dog, or call him something else that's more of a positive? Because for some of us still, when we hear it, it takes us back there. And it goes back to one of those empathetic things to me, as you were asking the question, Jennifer, I think about the Confederate flag. Now things have begun to change where people are asked to take it down, or take down certain statues that represent the Confederate Army, or different things like that. But back not too long ago, it was something that was very much accepted based on Southern heritage. And I understand that, but I always think about empathy. Ardry, I know and Jennifer as well, back in the 90s, where the Malcolm X movement, it repeated itself. I remember the movie Do the Right Thing. And I remember that opened up a conversation even more so with the young persons of our generation back in the 90s. And I can remember, y'all remember the little African symbols that people start wearing around their necks and different things like that. And I remember it didn't feel quite right with me. And the only reason why it didn't is because I thought about, how is that going to make my counterparts feel? Is it going to make them think that I'm not appreciative of the fact that I am American? Yes, I am proud to be an African American, but does it take away them thinking, or does it cause them to think that I'm not appreciative to be who I am just as an African American woman? So it caused me to start thinking about it, because I'm not saying I was apologetic for it, not at all, because I still wear my little Nefertiti earrings, but I always thought about how does it make the other person feel, and what does it make the other person think? And every time I hear the word nigger, it takes me back there. You're immediately thinking that someone who's of color is ignorant, less than, lazy, those type of things. So it still does something to me, but I've just learned how to address it in a different way. Even with the word NIGGA, it just gets to me. And I think your question was why, Jennifer. I think young people and even people of our generation continued to use it because they just didn't understand. It was a form of communication, but in my opinion, it was still a negative form of communication because, even when we speak now, there's tones, there's messages behind what we say. You can tell someone, I love you, and then you can go and say, oh, I love you, or I really love you. There's 3 different messages behind each way we said it, but it means that I really like you, or I like the action that you took, or I feel some kind of way about you. So whenever I hear that word, it goes back to that meaning for me. And I think though a lot of younger people, especially back in the 80s and 90s, they began to use it as an empowerment or an endearing word. But at the end of the day, when someone else heard them say it, like you, Jennifer, they would think, well, why are they saying that amongst themselves? So, and even Ardry and I, working with young people, when 9 times out of 10, when we even hear them saying it amongst themselves, it's to put each other down. It's rare that it's a word of endurement or, that's my boy. Mm-hmm. So it still does something to me. And like you all, when I hear it, I do make sure I address it. But again, I'm being more cognitive now of the audience. You have to think about who you're talking to and who can I make a change if I sit and have that conversation with the person. And I used to have it a lot, Ardry, when we worked at Union, because the guys, it was easy for us to reach them. So it was one of those things where I would have that, and they would develop a better understanding. But then you can tell you only reach maybe 1 of the 10 you're having the conversation with. And so I would always say, but Lord, if I just reached that 1, I just made a difference. And then you would hear that 1, when he would hear some of the other guys at least say it around myself or another person, adult person that they know did not appreciate it, then they would go and correct one of their peers. So it kind of was like, okay, we lit a fire within that person, and now that person is trying to help educate some of the other young people. And then again, it makes me think of the whole Confederate flag, Jennifer. Often I think that white people have that question, why do we use it amongst ourselves? But then I have that same question about the Confederate flag. If you know it's painful for someone to see that, then why do you continue to display it? I'll never forget my first time seeing that. And it was literally, this was the late 80s, but it was with a neighbor of someone who lived in our neighborhood who I loved and respect, and as an older person. And so they had invited me to come in one day. They wanted to give me something from their house. And I get in their house and they have a Confederate flag, and it caught me so off guard. I was scared, like, do I run now or do I say something or what do I do? And so we got to talking or whatever. And so I asked them to explain it to me. And that was the first time I was told and read to the whole Southern heritage. And he didn't mean it to offend, but he was proud of his heritage. And so I didn't say anything else about it, but I just remember thinking to myself, but do you know how that makes me feel? Or do you know, because, at that time I had been told a lot of the stories about the Ku Klux Klan and different things like that. But just even as a child, I felt some kind of way about it, So that leads to even my question with that whole thing. Why do people even parade that when they know how it does make someone feel? And again, I think, I already know the answer, but it's just more of, in my opinion, it helps each and every one of us develop more empathy towards things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is because I think that just like your experience, people don't realize it means one thing to them and it means something else to somebody else. And until we're able to really understand and see it, then we get to make a choice from that place. And this topic and this conversation around, using that word, and I think the same thing is true. I think that there are things that white people can say to each other that Black people, that they will, get offended by if a Black person were to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that goes both ways, and probably with all of the races. And so it seems like, one, we're making those generalizations, like all cops are bad, all, Black people are, whatever it is, all Democrats are this, all it's like, and that just creates such division, because we when we really are honest, we know that that's absolutely not true. We know that there are certain people within all of those different things, whether it's police, whether it's Black people, whether it's white people, whether it's, whatever, that, are, in my mind, they're really lost. I think too, with everything going on right now, there's just so much that's feeding our fear. And so everybody's on guard. It's like, instead of looking at, like what Ardry was saying, what I heard you saying when you were talking about the experience in Publix is that you're not looking for it. And that you're no longer focused on looking for it and looking to be offended. And I feel like that, especially right now, because of some of the things that have happened, it's just like everybody's on guard. Everybody is walking around with this armor, and then we filter something that's said through our own experiences and our own lenses, our own judgments, and that it's almost, I think that there's certain people that this is really an opportunity to come together and to take things to a higher level. And then I think that there are some people that it's an opportunity for them just to reinforce those beliefs that they had. And I think that's on both sides. I don't really know what the answer is to that, and that's not what I feel like I'm supposed to try to figure out. It's just to have these conversations and to create opportunities where we get to understand each other better, because it's sad that we're at a place where everybody's on the defensive and everybody is like, Black people are scared. They're worried about white people or cops or whatever it is, and the cops are scared because they're worried that the Black people are gonna, and it just creates this environment where we're all so uptight and wound so tight that it's like waiting, it's gonna explode, and it is exploding, and so I don't really know what the answer is to that, other than just to show up and to have conversations like this. And if you guys have anything to speak on that, please do.
I guess I want to interject a little bit on what you were saying about the police and Black people. I think, and I'm not the almighty or whatever, but just from my opinion, I think a lot of that, the problems that we are having in some of the bigger cities with the police issue is a lot of what you were saying earlier is fear. Half of it is because we do have some bad apples as the police. That's just like with any other profession. We cannot rule out that we have some bad apples as policemen. But I think the other part of it is fear, like you were saying. Black people are already afraid because of the few bad apples that we do have, that whenever they're stopped or pulled over or whatever, they won't make it home, or they won't live through, being pulled over. And then the police are afraid because of the way Black people are responding to the police. And so I think both sides are afraid. They're already on edge. And so, just small incidents turn into big things because it's fear on both sides. And a lot of it is because we aren't having these conversations, and we aren't getting to see people as human beings. What we're doing is we're going off of what conversations that we've heard when we were little, when we were growing up in our houses. And we got to be honest, because my granddaddy said that so-and-so was the worst person, and they were all liars, and they're all thieves, and none of them are good, and yada, yada, yada. And so we grow up with all those misconceptions. Sometimes we grow up staying clear of the other race, so we never actually get to find out, if those things were true or not. And then we grow up and we go into all our different professions, whatever we grow into, and we take that baggage with us. And so if we do get to have these conversations that we are privileged to having right now, or like you said, when you were a kid, a teenager, and, some things you had heard, but then hanging out with the group of friends that you had, you start to question those things. Well, maybe they aren't so bad, or, maybe we are, just alike. And that happens on both sides, because, I'm going to be honest, we grow up with the same conversations in our households as well. Our conversation is stay clear, of white people, try not to get in trouble. To the boys is don't date white girls. All of those things that we come up with because we're living out of fear, because for generations and generations, it was taboo for interracial, relationships or whatever. So you grow up with the black moms and the black grandmothers telling the sons, don't date because they're afraid something is going to happen to them. So we grow up with all of these misconceptions, whether they're true or not. And then we, like I said, we go into the different fields, we take that baggage with us, and we never find out if those things are true. And then we have the stuff that we're having now, stuff that's just boiling over. And at this point, you can't even put the lid back on the pot. It's, it's out and it's everywhere now. So, and some people will look at this and say, oh, we don't need to talk about it. We need to just let it go. No, we don't need to let it go. We need to communicate with each other and find out that we really are we're all human beings. We were all created in God's image. God created us all in his image. We all came from Adam and Eve. I don't care what color we are or what side of the planet we ended up on. One person is lighter than this person is darker. We all came from God. We all are going to go to the same heaven or same hell. There's no two different ones. There's not a black one and there's not a white one. We're going to have to share heaven. So I don't know why it's so tough for us to share earth. I do know. It's the enemy. I do know why. But again, I think just right where we are right now, are we going to change everybody by looking at this video? No. It's like you said, some people are going to pick and choose, just like with the flag. Even when you get the knowledge or the history on the flag, and I'm going to be honest, for a long time, I, didn't know who created the flag or whatever, or whatever it was meant for. I just recently read the whole little thing on it. And so to me, the flag was, honestly, I'm going to tell you, whenever I left outside of Florida, when I went to Georgia, I was always afraid to go to Georgia. When I saw the flag, I was always scared to death. I'm just not going to lie to you.
That's what we were taught. You don't go to Georgia. You don't stop in Georgia.
I was there. Yeah, it was no stopping.
No stopping.
But yeah, I just think we do got to have these conversations and keep having these conversations so we can humanize each other and see that we all are people, created in God's image. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Shenetta, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I just agree with what you all have said so far. And I'm grateful. I'm really grateful, even just for our conversation, because it helped to open my eyes up, Ardry, to how much is still going on in everyday life right now. Ardry, I shared it with Jennifer after watching the video the other day. I really got emotional for a moment, only because I felt each and every one of our hearts in that video about our personal experiences. And Ardry, with you, you experienced it much more than I do. And again, we talked about this last week. Everybody's experience is individual with it all. So it opened my eyes to it. It also opened my eyes more to the fact that I still had stuff that I needed to deal with. And what I mean by that is because I always looked at it as, Michelle Obama, she said something a couple of years ago about some of the things that her and President Barack Obama had dealt with. And I think her comment was rise above. And that was something that I was always taught as a child. You rise above it. You don't pay attention to it. You keep it moving. You prove them wrong, basically. And so that was the way I dealt with it. But as we talked more about it last week, it helped me to see that, Father God, coming from a spiritual standpoint, there is so much evil behind what is going on right now. And it's not just okay enough for me just to rise above it, but make sure I'm more aware of what is going on with it. I think prior to Dominique, which is my son, graduating, I had my thumb more on the pulse because I wanted to know what was going on and I wanted to be more a part. When I was married, same thing. Up until 3 years ago, I was more concerned about what the African American male experienced than myself, because it was one of those things where I just knew, for me, you rise above it. You pay attention with it, you deal with it right then, and then you just stay focused on your goal, or you stay focused on caring about people or loving people, and not really thinking about, though, that could have been adding more layers to it, to be honest with you all. So our conversation last week and then seeing the video the other day, it just really helped me to stop and put my finger back on the pulse, to pay attention really what's going on. And this time, I don't think it'll take me to a place of anger or pride, but more of a place of love and being more empathetic for all. Because, one of the things that has really brought me to just tears this time was seeing more people involved in the movement, not just African Americans or just Caucasian people, but worldwide right now, And so it's one of those things, to me, God has given us the opportunity to address some of the evil and the sin in our country right now. And Audrey, you talked about it a minute ago, and reach to the pot. No, this time we can't even put the lid on the pot. It's overflowing. And I think we're all taking a notice that if we don't do something about it, it's going to burn our house down. Because think about it. I thought about this not too long ago. It seems like every 10 years, something like this will happen to this magnitude, and you'll hear about it a little bit on, television, or we'll talk about it for maybe a couple of days or 2 weeks, but then it starts to die back down. But when we think about even the marches that is occurring, they've been occurring now for the last, I think, 21 to 31 days now. So even that within itself, to me, is a wake-up call to say, hey, we have to continue to address this, and we have to do something about it, because we know one or two things can happen. It can be reinforced if we don't do something about it. And, on the other side, it can cause people to become even angrier, and respond in a more aggressive way. So I'm really grateful for this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, to me, that the Lord has given our country another chance once again to address one of its evils, because he doesn't turn his back on that type of stuff. There are consequences, as we know, to all sin, and racism is a sin, and we have to look at it and address our own individual beliefs. And I think, like we talked about last week, utilize our own talents to our gifts to address it. And hopefully, just, if it changes one person, that's making a difference, because then that one person will help affect someone else, and it'll keep going. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And I think it's really going to help some people at least start conversations, because we've talked about, believe it or not, ladies, a lot of different topics in these two interviews. And it's like little subtopics that if one or two people pick just one, can lead to some change within their lives. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And yeah, it is a lot. There's a lot, and there's a lot we haven't talked about too, which is crazy. There's even more, that we could, more little tentacles of it that we could talk about. But I feel like what you said, what you guys were saying, it is so true. And I think it comes down to, there's policy changes and those types of things that need to be looked at and addressed. But until we get to what's real for us as individuals and in our heart, that's when real change will take place. Because, you still, like you said, you go out, and it seems like that everybody's trying to do the best they can, and they're trying to protect themselves and their kids and their families, and that's on both sides. And they're doing it in a way based on their experiences and their beliefs. And then in some of that, again, on both sides, it's just instilling more fear. And so until we really begin to understand what is coming from a place of fear and what is coming from a place of love, then things can't change. And and we do it. And I think parents, I don't have kids, but I know I have seen the love that my mom has for me and my dad, and I can, I've seen just that parental love is like, it scares me to death to think about having kids and loving somebody so much. I mean, truthfully, it does, because in an effort to try to protect, sometimes we instill things that aren't in the best interest.
We go to great lengths sometimes to protect
Yes.
our kids.
Yeah, and sometimes it can have the opposite impact we wanted to have, and I think we're seeing that. And so, yeah, I also just appreciate this opportunity to be able to come together and understand you guys better and understand where you're coming from, and we all have a lot the same fears, and we want the same things, and we want what's best for ourselves and others. And so I think it's each our responsibility to look at our beliefs and to realize we don't have to believe everything that we've been taught or that it has been ingrained in us, and that that there's a difference between acting from our emotions and responding to conviction.
I'm some type of way right now. I don't know why I'm all emotional right now. So yeah.
In like what way?
I don't know. I just feel like we've achieved something. Like, we made some headway today with the conversation that we just had. We each learned something different about each other, and we can, turn off this recording and feel good about it. Not have any hurtful or or nobody's offended. We said things that were uncomfortable for both sides, but I don't know. I just feel good about it. I feel like we're in a good space.
Yes,
I
agree.
And I felt the same way after last week's conversation too. And like this just, and I have a teacher who says that conflict is an opportunity for closeness. And if you use conflict in the right way, we have an opportunity to do just what we're doing right now, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that we get to do that. I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.